So again, tonight's conversation comes from the place of, in recent weeks, literally it's a sign of the times, many of our clients who are actively engaged at employing people and hiring people and growing businesses. They're growing businesses and therefore growing teams. And we're in this uncharted situation as it relates to COVID and the stop-start and ins and outs and this whole conversation that's playing out regarding vaccinations. And we're starting to see some flow on at different parts of the world and even in Australia in recent weeks as to how employers are needing to navigate through the do we or don't we need to get vaccinations? Are we or are we not making decisions as it relates to vaccinations? So there's two parts to this conversation. Can we make sure we're muted if we don't mind? There are two parts to this conversation. There is the moral component of this conversation, and every one of us has an opinion on vaccination, yes or no, and everything in between. And then there's the commercial responsibility as employers, as leaders, as business owners, as it relates to the safety and the working environment of our team, particularly for many of you who are mobile. You know, your business is mobile, you're in and out of environments and sending your team members into environments that perhaps are not as safe as they can be as it relates to vaccination. Could be something potentially that comes back to bite you. Then there's the other side to the commercial element that lends itself, and Gwen will help again uncover some of the curiosity points as to what is and what isn't appropriate at the moment in the market as we see it today. It's the part around, if you're in an environment where you prefer that your team, your employees are vaccinated, how do you go about that conversation without it being forced down their throat? Because it's still at an individual level, it's their decision. At a business level, it's your decision. What we're seeing with some of our bigger clients, we're actually seeing some of our developer and builder clients, they're being forced to show vaccination cards and vaccinate and the inventory of human beings that are vaccinated on their team, similar to union sites where you need a certain level of white card, red card, and what have you. Same thing is occurring now as it relates to the bigger end of trade and construction as to don't quote on this job unless you have the designated resources that can attend vaccinated. So without a further ado, I want to introduce the room to our very good friends, and they have been great friends of Business Benchmark Group for a very long time, Employsure. And Employsure is an authentic, bona fide, unbelievable outsourced HR service. And I don't say that lightly because we utilise the service ourselves here at Business Benchmark Group as well. Many of our clients have come to reach out and meet with Employsure, and they know within Employsure there is a weapon called outsourced HR, which at any time, at any moment, you are up to date with anything that changes or moves as it relates to the award and or aspects, elements of the Fair Work Act. And not only that, when you're a client of Employsure, if you follow their advice, you have an underwritten insurance policy that ensures that if you follow their advice and there's a problem, if you have an unfair dismissal, for argument's sake, they back you with their insurance policy. So without a further ado, I want to introduce our guest who's going to be sharing her expertise as it relates to the vaccination and other elements of the HR world that we're all in. Gwen Espie is a business partner with Employsure and has been with the business for nearly 5 years. Gwen has over 20 years of HR experience across small, medium and large business, with a particular focus in industrial relations and employment law. Gwen has presented various times to our community, and I welcome her again from the most beautiful Tasmania. Thank you, Gwen. Good to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Stefan. I don't know, it's so beautiful today. It's bucketing down with rain. It's not very pleasant at all. Say good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I've just noticed behind me, I don't know if you can see, in which way should I go? My dog has to be as close to me as he gets. So he's sitting on the bench just outside the window from him at the moment. So I just want to take a second and share my screen with you. just want to run through some thoughts and some things to think about when we're talking about the COVID vaccine. Obviously, there's other vaccinations that different workplaces might be helpful or useful, like the flu vaccine, but this is particularly around the COVID vaccinations that are available. So we know about the national rollout strategy. There were certain phases: phase 1, phase 2, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and then phase 3. From what we understand, that we're behind the 8 ball when it comes to the actual timing of the rollout for various reasons. And things have changed, particularly in states like some of you may be in Victoria and New South Wales, where vaccinations are being made available that may not have been normally available up until phase 2B, for example, to get as many people who are wanting to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. So it's hard to say which phase we're up to at the moment. We're probably somewhere between 2A and 2B, but certainly at this stage, not really anyone under 18, unless they fall into being young people who are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. They are able to get the vaccine because they've got a greater risk should they contract COVID. So what does that all mean for those of you who are business owners and thinking about, can I or should I ensure that my employees are vaccinated? So first of all, you have a fundamental obligation as an employer to provide a safe workplace for your employees. Now, that's a physical and emotionally or psychologically safe workplace, and it includes keeping them safe from COVID. So at the moment, you would all have things in place, depending on what state you're in and what industry you're in, where you might have, different personal protective equipment that your employees have to wear, whether it's, just masks or, having the hand sanitizer everywhere, hand washing, having your employees 1.5 metres away from each other during the day, all of those things to keep them, as safe as you can from contracting COVID, when in fact you are able to have them in the workplace. Just out of curiosity, just a nod or a wave, are most of you in states where you are in lockdown at the moment? Victoria, New South Wales, parts of Queensland? Yeah. We've been very lucky here in Tas not to experience that just yet again, and hopefully, touch wood, we'll get through. But so, you'll be experiencing different things, obviously through the shutdowns or the lockdowns as well. So at this point still, the federal government has announced that the vaccine will not be made mandatory across the board. However, they have said, I think it's September the 21st, last time I just had a quick look, for people working in aged care, it will be mandatory. Obviously, we know how vulnerable people who are living in aged care facilities are, and how terribly the COVID infections have done, and what they've done to those people. So at this stage, unless you're an aged care facility or an aged care provider of some description, you can only request employees to be vaccinated if your direction is lawful and is also reasonable. So that's what we want to unpack. What does that actually mean? What is lawful and what's reasonable? And particularly that word reasonable, it's the Fair Work Act, for example, defines reasonable as what a reasonable person might consider to be reasonable. So I find that a really helpful definition of not, of course. So first of all, the lawfulness of requesting employees to be vaccinated. So FYI, this sore throat and a little bit of a cough is definitely not COVID. I've had a COVID test. I'm all good. But first of all, is there a high risk or realistic risk of infection of COVID in your workplace? So is it, a workplace where, it's got a higher than most people have of a risk of COVID being in the workplace. The second thing is the employee performing duties in an environment which might be prone to infection spread. So things like if you're working in perhaps a factory where you've got employees who are quite close together because they have to be because of the nature of the work, and they're touching the same items, things like that. That might be something that you would think about. Well, that if we get an infection, it's likely to spread quite quickly. Can the employer implement other measures to successfully mitigate the spread of infection? So things like largely like we're already having to do, depending on your state. Can you require your employees to wear a face mask, go the next stage and wear a face shield? I actually saw a lady walking around Tassie, one of those in my local town the other day with a mask and a face shield. Never seen that in Tassie because we haven't had to do masks really. So I'm not quite sure what her actual scenario was. Can you require them to wear more additional PPE? Things like, gloves, the full sort of spacesuit, if you like. Can you take their temperatures when they come in? Do they have to be required to provide a negative COVID test once a week? All of those things you might consider as other measures to mitigate so far as you can the spread, if it was to get into your workplace. Does the employee have a valid medical reason or genuine political or religious belief for refusing the vaccine? Now, we know that some people who may have suppressed immune systems can react very, very badly and even have anaphylactic reactions to vaccines of different types. I'm not talking COVID specific. Or perhaps they are, they actually have, a genuine allergy to something that's in the vaccine. So there is a genuine medical reason that they're going to be able to provide to you evidence from their doctor why they can't have the vaccine. And then, of course, genuine political or religious belief. That's probably a little bit harder to measure or judge. And can obviously be a very much a hot topic in a workplace if you're going to have to talk through those, particularly. But if there are particular religious beliefs, particularly for refusing the vaccine, then the other lawful reasons you need to think about is the direction consistent with federal, state, or territory requirements? So, as we said up top, if you're an aged care facility, after a certain date in September, you're going to be allowed to mandate that your employees are vaccinated. They're going to have to provide, valid reasons why they shouldn't be after that mandate. But until such time, if and when the government, whether it's state or federal level, mandate that, all industries or various industries, that's a part of that lawful thought, thinking through that you'll have to do in requesting that your employees do get a vaccination. So then we move to the reasonableness test. So if there's no lawful reason for you to require that they get a test, they get a vaccination. So at the moment, for example, you can put in other measures to protect them in the workplace. You're not dealing with vulnerable people, and there's no law that says you're allowed to mandate that they get vaccinated. Then what you need to do is look at a risk assessment and also consult with your employees. So those of you who work in some industries, you'll be very familiar with risk assessments, and you're really following the same process. So the risk assessment would look at things like the hygiene of your workplace. So is it at a level that you could step it up another notch to try and, is there another level of cleaning, an extra clean of the business area or the facilities that an employee might work in order to add that extra layer of protection? difficulty of enforcing social distancing in the workplace. So again, thinking if you've got a crowded work because of the nature of your industry, that would be something that you would consider. How crowded is it? Can I get them more distance or not? And I always think of being in an airport. Those of you who've flown during this time, in an airport, you're forced to keep quite a distance between each other. And then we hop on a plane and we sit shoulder to shoulder with the person that we've just had to keep and, a metre and a half away. All of those considerations. Does your employees and members of the public? An obvious one is a retail shop or a food, a restaurant or a cafe, or if you're a disability support business or someone going in and out of different workplaces on a regular basis. And then the number of vulnerable employees that you have at the workplace or visitors to the workplace who are also or may be vulnerable. So if you've got employees who may have, underlying medical conditions that might make them particularly vulnerable if they were to contract COVID, or I know there's a business here in Launceston who's talked to me about this very issue because they're a financial advice. That's what they do. They provide financial advice, and the vast majority of their clients are well into their retirement. So, arguably more vulnerable than the average population, and that's everyone who's coming into their workplace, or the vast majority. So that's one of the things they're considering. Are our clients so vulnerable that we should be, requiring our employees to get the vaccination? And of course, then do your workers undertake face-to-face work away from the main place of work? So sales reps, delivery drivers, people like me who go into workplaces and help our clients with particular HR issues. At the moment, one of the things that Employsure ensures is that workplace that I'm going into is COVID safe. So I've got all the COVID safe measures in place. One of the measures may be in the future, how many employees or what a percentage of employees are vaccinated in order for it to be safe enough for me to go. And that may be something that you would also need to consider when you're considering the reasonableness of requesting employees to be vaccinated. So there we've got the two elements. We've got lawful and we've got reasonable. So then you've done that and you've either established, look, we've got a lawful reason to ask our employees to get vaccinated, or we've got a reasonable reason to ask them to be vaccinated due to the risk assessment that we've done. So what if an employee says, nope, not getting it done. I'm not getting vaccinated and you can't make me. What are some of the things that you'd need to consider? Because that is a fairly significant employment relation issue. And there's been a couple, at least half a dozen that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there are others that just haven't gone right through the commission, of employees who have lodged unfair dismissal claims because their employment has been terminated because they refused to get the vaccine already. Now, at least two of those, I'm not aware of the outcome of all of them. At least two of those have lost their claim. So the commission has said no, it was a fair dismissal. So one of the things you want to look at is, well, what's the reason for the refusal? Why are they refusing to get it? Does the employee have a religious or medical ground which permits refusal? And if they do, what can you or should you do about that? Then, is the vaccination required for them to perform the inherent requirements of their role in a safe manner? So for me, a classic example of that is something that my husband actually does. He goes into, works for an electrical data company that makes does a lot of work within hospitals to do all of their nurse call systems and their entry requirements. So you put your entry card up and get entry into a particular part of the hospital. Now, in one of the hospitals, in smaller ones in and around Tassie, there was a handful of nurses who refused to be vaccinated, which fascinates me, but that refused to be vaccinated. So what my husband did was actually program their security card, their entry card, so they couldn't access parts of the hospital where they would have particularly vulnerable patients. So that was the one way that in this instance, the employer managed that situation. But if you've got someone like a nurse who is perhaps nursing aged care patients, can they actually do that role safely and not be vaccinated? If you've got someone is a disability care worker, or if you've got an employee who goes into homes to perform work, it might be maintenance work or, building or whatever it might be, where there are often vulnerable people, whether it's elderly or people who are unwell or what have you, people with disabilities that might make them more vulnerable. Can they do that safely without the vaccine? And going back to that same question we've asked a few times, can the direction to vaccinate be justified? So, for example, is it a requirement based on government advice? So not necessarily mandated, but advice that the government is providing. So right now, I know in New South Wales, Gladys, and I never even try and say her last name because I can never get it out, Gladys has suggested and strongly advised that people who work on construction sites, if they want to return to work and get out of lockdown, they need to get vaccinated. So that's advice at this stage. It's not law. It hasn't been mandated. So it's one of the considerations that you might think of when you're deciding whether or not you can require your employees to be vaccinated. So what can you do? At the very heart of it, if you can't force your employees to be vaccinated, so therefore you've got no legal mandate to do that, or your risk assessment identified, look, the risk isn't high that my employees, that the COVID might get into my workplace, and if it did, the risk isn't high that it would spread quickly, then you need to think about other things to do. So first and foremost, you would have a policy that strongly urges all of your employees to be vaccinated as part of your broader sort of infection control. And most of you, if not all of you, would already have an infection control policy of some description. And that what it looks like will depend on your business. And that is something that you can do, and it's well within your bounds of rights, if you like, to be able to do that. Strongly urge that everyone gets the vaccine. Existing control measures that you've already got. So having your COVID safe plan in place, making sure that people are abiding by it. If they're not abiding by it, if you see employees walking in and, first thing in the morning, for example, and they're not hand sanitizing, that can turn into a disciplinary matter. And so make it a disciplinary matter, end up giving that person a warning. And then if they continue to do it, you might exit them from the business. Get as tough as you need on your COVID safety plan. Make sure that they're wearing their PPE. Again, if they're not wearing their face mask or their face shield or whatever it is that you've implemented, make it a discipline matter if they don't abide. And then, complying with all those other things like having, the safe distance between your employees, so much as possible. I know a lot of businesses, retail businesses are obviously the most obvious, but offices as well are getting those plastic screens put up between desks. So there's less chance that people are breathing on each other. But if they're anything like me, I tend to, like in the post office, I tend to stand to the side of the plastic screen to talk to them because I can't hear very well through the plastic screen. So, that's, you assess what's working and what's best. I'll just go backwards off that one. So that in essence is the basics of your COVID vaccinations and some of the thoughts that you would need to think through. So Stefan, will I hand that back to you at the second?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I guess what rings loud is there's no official, perhaps the first official mandated piece from the government will be in September, and as it relates most appropriately to nursing homes and aged care, workforce. So for many of us in this room who are in trade and construction and or similar businesses, there's nothing as it relates to mandated advice or clear black and white, this is what happens, this is what not happens. Therefore, it comes back to the onus being on the owner, the employer, and working it through with the employee. But my recommendation is always, if you were to think about this from two sides, there's the moral side. There's no two ways about it. You know, everyone has an opinion at an individual level, whether what is going on, what is playing out globally, by the way, and in Australia, whether it's right or wrong, vaccinations, everyone has an opinion on it and a view on it, and we're all adults and we're making our own decisions as it relates to the personal space. On the other hand, we have a business and a commercial obligation. We have a responsibility, and as we heard just there, the onus is on the employer to create the safe workspace. Now, what that looks like and how that plays out is for every one of us. Our plan. That's our plan. I mean, what we can't do is ignore having a plan. Does that make sense? Would you agree with that, Gwen? I mean, based on the grey zone that we're on or in, it's about having a plan. So what you've just shared gets my curiosity or sharpens my curiosity as to, okay, here they are. Here's 4 or 5 reference points. And for different states, we've just heard in recent days, the New South Wales advancement on this one. Queensland, again, they're fairly clear on what their expectations are. Victoria, it's pretty clear. South Australia. So right now, the onus is on the owner. And it's important that you have a plan. And a plan in accordance with, well, these are the things that you can't do, these are the things that you can, which, by the way, are all part of a plan called HR and legal and employer-employee agreements, regardless of COVID and vaccinations anyway. It's called the Fair Work Agreement. That overrides most aspects as it relates to HR law, would you say, for small business, Gwen?
The Fair Work Act, absolutely. Yep. And you've got, which is a federal act, but then you've also got your work health safety acts, which we've got a federal one, but we've also got all state-based ones as well, which is quite interesting. But both of those together. And from what you were just saying, Stephen, in respect to COVID and your obligation as an owner of a business to keep your employees safe, it's no different than, I know some of you in construction, than making sure that your employees are safe if they're going up a ladder. If you haven't got a plan in place as to how to do that safely, similarly, if you haven't got a plan in place to navigate the COVID complexity safely, and something, worst case scenario, an employee did contract it in your workplace because there wasn't adequate measures in place to keep them safe, that we're yet to see one, but that's bound to, end up in some sort of, potential for litigation and so forth through work safe down the track.
Yeah, so I guess a question a little tangential here, a little asymmetric. Who in this room doesn't have on speed dial HR advice that is recent, today, and in the moment? Who doesn't have access to that type of advisory? Okay. Those of you that do, how reliable, how effective, how insured is that advice? Because it changes, and it's changing every other day. So if you don't have it, please ensure you're reaching out to Employsure as an option. And Malcolm, who's here, who's our direct partnership manager as it relates to our clients at Business Benchmark Group and Employsure. Employsure look after 30,000 small businesses in Australia and New Zealand across all industries. And they have approximately 1,500 people on their books that are solely responsible for providing the most up-to-date and most relevant. And if they say something that's not relevant and you go and act on that, you're insured. I just think it's a no-brainer. So this is a tricky environment we're entering. We're dealing with people's mental health. We're dealing with our physical health. We're dealing with something that is stopping nations from being productive. I mean, this is uncharted and uncertain times that we're experiencing as a community, as a nation, as a globe, as a human race. And therefore, the last thing you want to do is also have, I guess, the naivety or the ignorance, because it may feel a little too difficult or too hard to do something about it. It will start with you. You have the responsibility. The onus is on you to ensure you're doing as best you can a conversation, a curiosity point as it relates to this is the scenario. Our clients are wanting it. For some of you, your clients are going to demand you do this. For some of you, your clients are going to say, hey, if you don't have at least 40% of your workforce or more than 10 people on your team who have a vaccination passport, you won't be okay to work on our site. Now, for some of you, that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Some of you are working, as I see in the chat here, you've got some amazing plans that are backed by the master builders, and that's great. That's your plan. You've got a plan. And you're also very clear about why you're not going the other way. I am in no position to say you should go one way or another. My only request here, and why we've invited Gwen and Malcolm to join us here tonight, is I don't want to be party to ignorance. I don't want to be a leader of a community that just decided to play ostrich for about 6 months. Let's put our head in the sand and see how much fun that is. I'm not okay with that. I'm okay with clarity. I'm okay with, okay, give me my options. What are my options? How do they play out for me on a personal level? How do they play out for me on a commercial level? How is it that I can have a conversation that's win-win-win with my team versus I'm forcing people to do things that they don't appreciate? Or my views may be I'm an anti-vaxxer and anyone that vaccinates on my team is the enemy. That's a bit odd. It's got nothing to do with who's right or who's wrong. It's got to do with, as a collective, what are we doing about owning it? Gary, great question as it relates to schools. Are schools considered a safe environment? Would I consider it a high-risk environment? Gwen, did you want to speak to that, or do you want me to have a go at that?
Interestingly, just this week in Queensland, they have added teachers as frontline workers. So they've added teachers to the list, like nurses and doctors and so forth. And I guess that's in recognition in part that this Delta variant is not being as discriminatory as the other variants that we've seen, and the children are catching it. So if I was to say right this second, in most states, is it considered a high-risk area? Probably not at the moment. But is becoming more and more so, I would suggest. And as more states, if they join the Queensland direction and, make teachers the frontline, they're like the frontline workers, then I think it would be reasonable to say that, look, yes, that you would consider a school a high-risk environment as well, if that's where you're doing work. Absolutely.
And being a school council president, I'm going into a school council meeting at 7 o'clock tonight. I can assure you it's probably the safest environment as it relates to protocols and the way they go about their COVID policies. Like, they're extremely safe. However, right now globally, 43% of the COVID cases globally are in human beings under the age of 18. So that sort of lends. I mean, Victoria got shut down a week ago because it happened at a school.
Schools, yeah.
So,
which we weren't seeing 6 months ago or 12 months ago.
And this is why the Delta strain and the 3-hour notice in Victoria to shut down with, take your bags and go home now happened as it did, because they noticed something really, concerning in the trends that got them to shut the place down again. So school environments, if you follow the school's COVID protocols, safest environment in the world right now, but in alignment with the school protocol. And the Department of Education is very robust. I can assure you they are, Gary. But again, you work that out with your I guess the manager of the grounds there and how and what. And typically most kids are doing remote right now because of the shutdowns anyway. So it's probably the safest place to be. Do you see this happening in the construction of retirement homes or only live environment retirement homes? Construction of retirement homes would lend itself to, unless it's an extension, Mark, in my view of that question, unless it's an extension of an existing home, I can't see it being an issue for you and your business. However, if the builder and developer is forced to be seen to be towing the line, and that goes downstream to all the trades, it will be. I mean,
Stefan, if you're doing a reno, or if you're an electrician going into the building or a plumber going into the building to do some maintenance, I think that there'll be a strong push for to be able to get in. It'd be kind of like having working with vulnerable people card. I think we'll say that it'll be a similar.
Definitely. Definitely. Or union sites is the example I've been using for our clients. If there's certain sites that you can't get on unless you've got certain cards, right or wrong. That's just the way it is. Joe, you say, whilst I recognise that every business is slightly different, but in reality, most businesses within the BBG network are similar. We all have offices, we all have employees, and 90% are also in the building industry. Fair statement. Should we therefore create a standard model that works for the 90%? Is that a question as it relates to the bigger picture here, or just the BBG community?
Well, I'm saying that it's, to me, if I created a policy and said we're not in a risky environment, and yet, John from the landscape guy says that he is in a, and then we're treating it all differently, then I'm suggesting that we're not reviewing it at the same standard, and that is a concern in itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying probably safety in the masses, because if we're all sort of doing similar things and having a base, then nobody could argue that why did you say it's not a risk and others did say it's a risk. You understand what I'm getting at?
And
some of that will come down. Sorry, Stefan.
Okay.
Come down to the tasks and the roles that your employees are doing. So you mentioned like the landscaping, they're obviously more likely to be outside, less likely to be, inside with children or the older people or whatever, where an electrician is more likely to be inside or someone, that sort of thing. So there's definitely room for differences in the risk assessment, but I definitely see what you're saying. Look, as a group, why don't we all agree on a baseline, what have you? I certainly don't see anything wrong with that, by no means.
And again, if you're in a situation like we got a couple of our Sydney clients in the room, and no doubt you're experiencing what we experienced in Melbourne, a year ago, and it was fairly painful. And in saying that, for us Melburnians a year ago, we were on our own. Everyone was laughing at us, right? and I guess for our Sydney side of clients, Callum and Pauline specifically, what are you guys experiencing as it relates to this and your ability to work? Because you work on high-end projects and tier one projects.
Yeah, well, we've just got back on site as of today. There is different requirements from hotspots in different suburbs to what's required. So you need at least a single jab. If it's older than 3 weeks, that's fine. If it's less than 3 weeks, you need a COVID test to prove negative. If you're outside the lockdown LDAs, you can turn up to site and work without any restrictions as such. But I believe that clause is going to be closed off today. So everybody's going to be under the same blanket, regardless of what area you come from. So from my point of view, we're up and running. Most of my guys have gone and got their jabs and are complying. However, I think I mentioned before, probably sent an email, I have one employee who's my number one site supervisor, who is 100% anti-vax and will not be getting the vax. So under that condition, he will not be allowed back on any of the sites that I have. Now, I did interview him yesterday to see what his end game was. He said, well, I'm just going to sit this out and see how it runs. As an employer, I'm going to have to make a call on that because he's my key worker on the site. If he can't fill the duties, I need to replace him. So I'll be having another conversation with him tomorrow to point out, and based on the facts I've got this evening, to have another discussion. However, if he still remains the same, something will have to happen. He can't sit at home for 6 months, accruing entitlements, sick leave, holiday pay, until he makes up his mind what he wants to do.
And I'm guessing on your behalf, you don't want to shove it down his throat, do you?
No, absolutely. I
mean, you I'm guessing, knowing you the way I do, and you have a moral standing on, hey, this is the situation, this is the card that we're dealt with, and I respect your views. However, I've got a commercial crossroad here that I've got to cross with you. In saying that, his skill set and his level of experience, particularly in your neck of the woods, where's he going to go?
Exactly. He's got
and that's his issue, right? Not yours.
Yeah.
He's probably a senior figure, Callum. As a senior figure, you're going to try and help him understand the consequences of his behaviour without shoving a jab down his throat, I guess.
Absolutely. And
it goes in your arm, Stefan.
I had the lick. I have the vodka shot every weekend. They tell me it's. Look. Yes, it does go down your arm.
I made note of the comments about the moral responsibility and the business and commercial responsibility. So that's the sort of conversation I'm going to have. So out of my whole team, I only have one problem, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
So, Callum, have you guys got HR? Do you have reference in HR advice and guidance?
We do to a certain level, but only through the Master Plumbers Association. So they're giving us that feedback. So we have a certain level.
This would be a good opportunity to introduce Malcolm to the room. Anybody that needs to reach out to Malcolm directly, he's one of the senior relationship guys in Australia and New Zealand, and he's here, a very good friend of Business Benchmark Group, and many of our clients are utilising the services. However, as it relates to this conversation tonight, and anybody that has a question that is of a reasonable question, not a capriccioso or a Hawaiian type question, right? Not those questions. But as it relates to this and or anything HR, Malcolm, can you share your details for anyone to reach out to you directly? And Nikki, can you put this on the chat? Can you put Malcolm's details in the chat as he shares them?
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, look, it's a difficult situation we all find ourselves in because, as Stefan said, it's uncharted waters. There's no precedent. And, you're dealing with a lot of different sets of legislation, but also philosophies, right, and personal opinions with this. So, I urge you, you don't have to be alone on this. Employsure support, about 24,000 businesses in Australia, right? We support owners and directors, and, you have access to resources, like Gwen, who's a superstar. Gwen's role she goes out and sits with businesses and their owners and helps them, sort of navigate through really tricky conversations, sometimes conduct issues, sometimes terminations, right? And these sorts of situations. And, it's not easy. You have to maintain your relationships with your people. Like you, Callum, you're one of your best site supervisors. but at the same time, you need to move on with your business and, be able to deliver certain projects and things like that. So, it's not lost on us that you're dealing with people, and it's unpredictable. So look, please feel free to reach out, contact me. I do urge, if you are going to contact Employsure in any way, shape or form, that you do contact me directly. I have been working with Stefan, Nikki and the Business Benchmark Group for about 4 or 5 years. As Stephen mentioned, they are also a client of ours as well. And I've looked after, a lot of Business Benchmark Group clients. So I work closely with Nikki and Stefan. We share ideas, and I become accountable to them if you do become, an Employsure client, and we can help you out on a more detailed basis. Please make sure that you call me directly. Nikki, if you could share my number, I'll read it out to those that have got a pen and paper handy. It's 0456 783 360. So 0456 783 360. Always state that you're a member of the Business Benchmark Group community. I always make sure I look after anyone that's in as part of that community. You can also quote an ERA number 1547. That's the Business Benchmark Group code, 1547. So look, I hope that helped, Gwen. I want to really thank you today. Difficult topic. It's changing consistently. Over the weekend, I was sending Gwen different, sort of emails and articles from The Age and different announcements. So we're trying to keep up to date with all this, the changes, to give people comfort that are clients of Employsure. We do have a research team that look at all the legislation and the announcement, and they update our advisors as to, where they believe a lot of businesses and industries sit. But as we said, it is a changing environment, so it's hard to pin down.
Thanks, Malcolm. And again, you can go direct to Employsure, and you may end up with someone that will help you. However, if you go through Malcolm and his specific team, there is an obligation to us that they will look after you as it relates to the service and everything that you may be needing. And again, as it relates to this conversation and the immediate future over the next 6 months, in my opinion, please ensure you put that number in a safe place. If you lose it at some point and you need it, just reach out to Nikki and she'll help you out. But just coming back to Callum's situation, because that is the classic crossroad for many of us that's coming. And you can't judge it. You may have a personal view on it in a quiet room, but as it relates to, as an owner, how you must behave with it is you've got to be balanced. You have to be balanced. It's important that you remain balanced. It's important to understand what is the motivation of your employee to take that stance versus judge them as to why they're taking that stance. And that's where it gets tricky. And therefore, being armed with where you could go at a legal level if you were left with no options, like you can't see the win-win in all this and you need to part ways, then to walk into a conversation like that, Callum and Pauline, and just have a little bit more detail as to how far or how you can nudge it a little to perhaps turn around for you or even your employee. I think walking into a room that is of that negotiation, because that's what it is, and being educated would be to your advantage. Okay, so reach out to Malcolm and make sure you have a chat with him and his team perhaps before you speak with your employee, in my opinion. Just on that very quickly, because Mark puts a really good point in the chat here. If let's just say tomorrow Callum and Bob don't meet eye to eye and they go their separate way, Gwen, is that grounds for unfair dismissal? Now I know there's a lot more that goes into that conversation, but just on the surface, can it get to an unfair dismissal case?
Yeah, on the very face of it, yes, absolutely. Yeah. It is obviously more complex, but there'd have to be an identified process and risk assessment and all of those things that we just talked about in the presentation, for it not to be not just an unfair dismissal case, but a successful unfair dismissal case. It is as you know, you rightly point out, Stefan, and Mal as well. It's a tightrope that we're balancing on at the moment with this, you know, pre-mandate or law regarding vaccines.
So my recommendation, because it is a tightrope, keep your people close to you. Keep it tight. Minimise judgment. Like, truly get invested in understanding their motivation, their interests, what's important to them, versus we've got to do this. Like, you know, Richard and Carol in South Australia, they do a lot of maintenance work in nursing homes. They've been told, based on the chat, that they actually open up. Richard, tell us what's been happening over there. What's the story with your business?
We're pretty lucky with the COVID situation here, but we had one of our biggest nursing home customers come to us with the mandate saying that if we don't get the vaccination and there's no reasoning behind it, that we'll no longer receive work there.
We reviewed our top 10 customers the other day as well, and we do work for the Leukemia Foundation. So they're actually one of our top 10 customers as well, and we think that they'll probably send it, you know, shortly. So yeah, that's two big customers that provide ongoing work to us that we'll probably have to get it done, you know, within the next month.
So in this safe environment, what's your commercial thinking as it relates to what could be coming for you guys?
We're just going to sit down with the boys on Monday morning and discuss it as a group. There's some people that don't want it, but like I had a chat with our supervisor today. He said that he doesn't want to have it done, and I just said it doesn't matter where you go. It's going to be mandatory everywhere. Large building sites are starting to enforce it. So, you know, builders won't give you work unless you have the vaccine done, as Callum just explained. So even if they do move elsewhere, which I'd hate for them to do, but, you know, we can't lose our biggest customers on the face that someone doesn't want to get an injection when they're going to have to get it in a year's time down the track.
Yeah, and that's the commercial thinking. So, you know, for many of you that have got more than 1, 2, 3 people on the team, you've got, you know, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 people on the team. You've been in our space, as Joe mentioned before, for a long time, and your business has grown and the team is growing. I think it'd be really important to do a stock take on where people's views are, and do that one-on-one. Don't name and shame in a group, because people may perceive that as peer pressure. You know, if the anti-vaxxers' hands go up, I'm going up too. If the other side goes up, the others do too. So if you embrace as owners, leaders, have that one-on-one conversation. Come from a place of care, right? Come from a place of genuine care. That's what owners should do. You have a responsibility to care. If you do that, find out. Because if you have 10 people on the team or 5 people on the team and 3 are okay with it, like, you know, they're just waiting their ticket, or they've already had it, you just didn't know it, that might be enough to do the work on the nursing homes and the clients that need it. Like Paul and Lisa up north on the Sunshine Coast, they're running a building and construction business. And, you know, at this point, I'm assuming your clients don't need it. Paul, is that fair to say? Your clients are not saying you need it, and on a personal level, you have a view on it, so you're not under the pump to go and do it.
No, the clients don't, you know, they're not asking for it, but I'll just stop there.
And it is. I mean, the thing that we haven't really touched on today, and we've got a couple of moments, I just want to make sure we don't leave this meeting without, this roundtable group, without sort of addressing it. And it ain't the elephant in the room anymore. It's the mental health element of this, not only for our employees, but also as owners and leaders, and the pressure for many of us, the weight that it puts on us to, okay, I've got to make a decision here. I've got to lead. I can't sit on the fence. It's not even a tightrope, it's a fence. I can't sit on it, right? So how is everyone in the room as it relates to your mental, your anxiety, your stress? How is everyone in different parts of Australia right now? Because we have a good representation in the room as it relates to how are you coping with, in Victoria, like this is lockdown number 6. Like the rest of the world is laughing at us. Like this is, whether we agree with lockdowns or not, The world is laughing at us. 3 hours notice to go home, shut your shop, throw the food that was in the fridge away if you're a restaurant. That's just insane. But this is the world we live in. Last year in Victoria, we had long lockdowns. That was painful. This year, we've got stop, start, up, down. You know, Sydney's going through a pretty, traumatic experience. Queensland seems to be the bridesmaid that comes and goes. South Australia, not a problem. Tasmania, not a problem. How is everyone doing in the room as it relates to our mental health? Who's struggling? Who needs help? Who needs a conversation? You're not on your own. If we haven't got to you this week, if the BBG team hasn't come to you, I need you to feel okay, to put your hand up. As a team at BBG, there's not a week that doesn't go by that we spend a good hour or so just being really clear with each other at the start of a week, in the middle of a week, and at the end of the week, we're all okay. I mean, I have felt the pressure these last couple of days, not because of anything obvious. It's just, it's there, man. It's real. It's happening. This morning, I spoke to 2 or 3 of my team members, got it off my chest. They helped me see it from a different light. Off I go. You're not on your own. No one's on their own. Your team members are not on their own. Don't assume that everyone's okay. Don't assume that we'll be right. We'll get through this. Power in the numbers. No, well, it's okay to be vulnerable. You know that. We're living in an age where it's okay to be honest. Speak up. If you're not okay and you're the boss, it's okay to say, I'm not fucking okay, man. Just say it. That way someone can help you. So Paul and Lisa, I'll reach out tomorrow. We'll have a chat. Okay? Because it's okay. We'll get through this. Michael and Shane, everything okay? Good.
Yeah, we've been lucky.
I want to welcome our newest Academy member to the room, Bradley Roberts from Bradley Allen Build, young up-and-coming chippy who's going to build an amazing residential build company at some point very soon. And he joins us here tonight for the first time. Welcome, mate.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
How have you viewed this conversation with experts in their field being Employsure? That's a global level business, and you got a great community here that are running and growing businesses, and you're at the start of a journey. How do you feel about tonight, mate?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a really positive reinforcement, I suppose, that I'm, made the right choice by coming on with you guys.
Wait till the money hits the bank.
That's it.
Very good. Mark Flynn, how are you going, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. Going all right. Got the kids at home, getting homeschooled at the moment. So by the time I get home, after everything during the day, I usually had a couple of calls from my wife because they've been in and out of lockdown so much that they're just, pulling each other's hair out and, fighting and that a lot more with each other this time. A bit of lack of understanding as well from our youngest one. She's just in prep, just wants to go to school, see her friends. So she gets very frustrated and sort of a few outbursts and things like that. But so it's sort of,
and there's that. And there's that.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't ignore there's that. So as employers, as employees, as human beings, there's all that as well. And the reference for these young children is the world they're living in right now, and that's not cool. It's not the world any one of us grew up in, and yet the kids of the last 18 months, literally the younger kids, this is their reference. It's not cool. So you got to be open and honest with them too.
Yep.
Bring them into an adult type conversation about, are you okay? Are you really okay? Good friend of mine in WA last week, his 21-year-old committed suicide. He was convinced that the world would be better without him. This kid had so much going on for him, and it just happened. So, don't take things for granted. Malcolm and Gwen, I really want to thank you for being here. And every so often we bring experts that we trust, and we also put our own money on the table as it relates to the trust. I want to thank you, Gwen. I know your voice was a little touch and go earlier today, but you did it marvelous as well. Malcolm, thank you for again making the time to be. I know you're one of the busiest guys in the world, But I thank you for again lending a personal touch to our community here. And again, please make there's no inquiry question or curiosity point with Malcolm and the team there that won't be addressed, answered, or perhaps help you get some clarity. So please reach out and make the most of that if you can. Everyone else, again, I know it was a different type of roundtable group. I want everyone to send through, what are your 3 key takeaways as it relates to? I mean, I put some questions very early in the chat, and my questions were for no other reason, just to get you guys thinking, right? Where is everyone as it relates to your next 6 months, right? And your workplace vaccination policy, where are you at? And you could say, hey, we're doing nothing. That's my plan, unless you have a plan. But to walk away and not have a plan is not cool. You've got to have a plan, and there's no judgment on your plan. It's your plan. As we are hearing, the onus is on the owners to navigate this currently directly with their employees. Don't leave conversations without what needed to be said wasn't said, okay? Do not leave a conversation without saying what needed to be said. Is that clear? That's what leadership's about. And every one of you are leaders. You're having a go. If you can send to me directly, I'll just put Nikki, can you put my email in there? Put my email address. 3 key takeaways as it relates to tonight and the sharing from the Employsure team. Thank you for being here. This will be recorded and shared on our resource centre on the website or wherever that is. So please go back to it if you need to refresh or reflect on anything else. If you have any specific questions that myself and or the team here at Business Benchmark Group can help you with, alternatively go to Employsure directly. Even if you've got external HR advice, that's cool. It's okay to get a second opinion occasionally, and you know my views on that. Bruce, good to see you here, mate. Good on you, mate. Good to see you. Everyone else, have a great and safe evening. Thank you for being here, and I hope you got something out of it because I did. It was good. Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks, everyone. See you. Take care. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.